Welcome back to the fourth podcast in the series. This week it's the best films of the 1950s. I'm here with the usual crew, Don, Chris and Kev. Hello everyone. Kev's very happy this week. Why are you so happy, Kev?
Because I've watched some great films from the 40s, Joe, and I'm looking forward to discussing them.
What films from the 50s?
Shit. And it's also the 50s.
So as usual, we're going to summarize the decade of the 1950s. So this week it's Chris to summarize. So go ahead, Chris.
The early 50s kind of followed the pattern of the 1940s, where you had a lot of edgy crime films and neo-realist films, or big budget films, because these were kind of two responses to post-war, either kind of escapism or realistic expressions of depression. And these kind of spread throughout the world, with realist films popping up everywhere, including some dramas with method acting becoming a thing in America with the beautiful Marlon Brando, and the first films of the great Indian director Sanjit Ray. There was a renaissance in Japanese cinema with the new prosperity of the country after the World War II recovery funding, and two major themes came out. Other films with other themes as well, but two major things, which were a resurgence of historical films, a lot of films set in the past of Japan then, and also kaiju, which is sort of giant monsters, such as Godzilla, which some would say are a reaction to the horror of nuclear warfare. So there were two major changes that happened in cinema in this decade. The first, which kind of started in the late 40s, was a growing importance of the Cold War and the Red Menace, which sort of started in the 40s but continued into the 50s, with a lot of people getting blacklisted because they were thought to be communists. There was also Cold War cinema. There's also monster films and things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, paranoid sci-fi, sort of fear of technology from the atom bomb. The other big change was TV. You could watch something very easily at home, so cinema had to compete with sort of gimmicks like 3D, smell-o-vision, my favourite, the Tingler, where you got electric shocks, and also big pictures, widescreen, big musical, big epics. Also, there were movies for teenagers, which was a growing market, things like James Dean movies. And in Britain, there was Hammer horror and Ealing comedies. And there was a growing sense of self-awareness around the time of sort of more cinema criticism, some of which led to movies about movies, which we're going to talk about today, some of those. And also early hints at kind of postmodern cinema in the very early work of some of the French New Wave, like Alain Resnais and the 400 Blows.
Cheers. Again, as always, we all put together our lists, and the first film that came out on top was Sunset Boulevard. So who wants to talk about the plot of Sunset Boulevard?
The film is really a meta-textual, self-reflexive discussion of cinema, and it is about a down-on-his-luck screenwriter who, while escaping some debt collectors, happens upon a Hollywood home, which is in which resides Gloria Swanson, who plays a equally down-on-her-luck silent film star. The difference is that she is entirely deluded and thinks that she is still this huge star and is set on reviving her career. And so she enlists this screenwriter to write a script for her. And so ensues a very dark relationship as he lives with her and she gradually falls in love with him. And it can only end in tragedy, really. Subtle spoilers.
Well, at the start, I feel it reveals the tragedy in the first 30 seconds. So.
Narrated by a dead man.
It is. That's probably a good place to start, isn't it? What do we all think of the beginning of the film? It starts with William Holden? It's not William Holden.
Yeah.
It is William Holden. William Holden dead in the swimming pool, narrating his own life, and it's very heavy on narration. It's very hard-boiled sounding. How do we all feel about it?
Yeah, enjoyed it. Yeah. So I think most of the rest of it, I maybe found Holden is a bit bland. But in the start, when it's more narration, I was like, yeah, I like this. It's got some good.
I have a feeling that the way that the narration is written is really like witty, but Holden might not be that charismatic as a sort of screen presence.
Yeah.
Do you know that like the original idea for it was going to be in a morgue, and all the corpses in the morgue were going to be sat up talking to each other, and William Holden's corpse was going to start telling his story. But at like I think it was either at test screenings or at script level, I can't remember. It basically got laughed out, and well, understandably, they changed it.
It was at test screenings.
Was it? Yeah.
Potentially that footage is somewhere.
Yeah, I would really like to see that. That sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I really like the narration side of it. I think you're right that William Holden isn't necessarily the most charismatic of guys, but I think it kind of works for that character, the sort of down on his luck.
I don't think charisma. I think he's a reasonably handsome guy in a sort of B-list film star way, but I think he's quite detached, quite cynical. He's not supposed to be someone who's entirely the kind of A-list star, and he wasn't. His film career had failed prior to Sunset Boulevard. He was previously the golden boy of classic Hollywood for maybe 2 or 3 films, and then that all goes down the pan. And then Sunset Boulevard's his comeback, really. So I think the film's kind of playing on the fact that he's maybe a little seen as a little haggard at this point. Haggard by Hollywood standards, he's still a beautiful man.
They tried to get a few people before him, didn't they? I believe they tried to get Brando.
Montgomery Clift.
Yeah.
Out.
Yeah, Montgomery Clift dropped. Yeah, you're right. Montgomery Clift dropped out. I think originally they tried for Brando, which was
would have not worked.
I guess can't imagine Sunset
Clift might have worked.
I think he dropped out for another project or something, didn't he?
Yeah.
I think he thought it was too similar to his previous film role, which he was kind of getting down with an older lady. Maybe not getting down with. Just
you're right. Yeah, because he was having an affair with an older lady at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah, that as well. So I think he felt like he couldn't play it convincingly for some reason, even though that had actually happened to him.
And what about Gloria Swanson? What do we all think of that performance? Because quite often it's cited as one of the kind of all-time great performances, and also one of the all-time great transitions from an actor, who was more well known for silent cinema into sound cinema.
I had a look online to see how much stuff she did after Sunset Boulevard, and it kind of she didn't really do a huge amount of stuff afterwards. I think it's quite interesting because I'm like, it feels very like, I don't know whether there's any interviews about this. I didn't like study this, but it like feels as though she came back to do this one role that she was like the perfectly suited person for. And it's like, I don't know whether she wanted it to be a resurgence of her career or whether she was literally just tempted back by such a good part for her. But it's like, she's like, it feels like the ideal part because it's like, she literally, without like the being a bit like crazy, she literally inhabits the same world as the character that she's playing.
I mean, it's interesting because you could probably compare her very favourably with Betty Davis, who had a very successful career at the time. But that's very melodramatic air that she has. I mean, possibly it was just Betty Davis who kind of caught the market. But I know that she was in retirement by that point. Eric von Stroheim had ruined her a little bit because he was a megalomaniac on his film sets, and she had basically decided, I don't really want to make films anymore. They both made a film. I can't remember the name of it. Hopefully, you can find it in the edit, Joel. They made a film which may not have been released and tanked completely, and a lot of money disappeared from the Hollywood coffers because of it, and Gloria Swanson and Eric von Stroheim were pretty much directly blamed for that. So, yeah. So maybe this was just the script was so good, she couldn't resist.
Because I know that there's one of the film clips they watch of hers in Sunset Boulevard is from a film that she walked off the set of and refused to finish. So it might be...
that's the film. That's the film I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I like the talking of sort of silent film. I love the scene which has sort of a few old actors coming back, including our old favourite Buster Keaton turns up, who also had kind of failed in his career by this point. And so it's a little bit bittersweet to see like the sort of big part that he could get is sitting as a washed up like old man who can't get a job kind of thing. But
yeah, I thought that was
matches the themes of the film.
One of the things I noticed on this rewatch was that it was much more darkly funny than I'd remembered, because Sunset Boulevard was probably one of the first sort of classic Hollywood films that I watched, I guess, when I was younger, and I don't think I picked up on some of the like dark humor in it quite as much, maybe. And some of it's genuinely very funny. I actually found myself like kind of laugh at the ludicrousness of her actions sometimes.
Yeah, like you can like something she says and then realize the tragedy behind it afterwards.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably the best example of that is they have a New Year's party, and William Holden's planning to go out, and Norma Desmond calls him down, and it turns out she's hired an orchestra, hired a full band, waxed the dance floor of her grand hall just for a date for those two. He's got no interest in her, and it's just this. It's funny to begin with, and then you realize it's this old woman who's kind of lonely, and really the only way she can figure out how to communicate with people is by exploiting them and by paying for things, because that's what she was used to on a film set. Yeah. And it's funny in the moment, and then you reflect on it, and it's deeply.
Well, I think that's why, like, because it's written by Billy Wilder, and a lot of the films I like the most by him are sort of directly comedies, whereas this isn't really directly a comedy, but you know, it has a lot of comedic elements. Yeah. And I went through a phase where I watched a huge amount of film noirs, and a lot of them aren't very good because they don't get the fact that some of the dialogue is kind of deliberately ridiculous. Like, it's incredibly like overwrought and overwritten, and that's enjoyable if it's got a sense of humor about itself. Like, some of the lines I think in Sunset Boulevard are deliberately meant to be like quite like over the top to the point where they're funny. Whereas I think a lot of film noirs just don't get that, and then they're just like very pole-faced, and they're like, look how cool we're being, especially like later ones where they're trying to go back to it. Whereas this, I think, captures like the line perfectly of like being darkly comedic.
Yeah, absolutely nailed it, doesn't it? That line. And I think like also I was reading that, I can't remember if this is exactly correct or not, but like the guy who designed the sets had also done a lot of designs for the houses of some of the really famous silent film stars of the era. And so the houses, the inside of Norma Desmond's house is genuinely like the inside of a lot of silent movie stars' houses. So he said, like, he took a lot of the ideas, you know, all the pictures of her and all this sort of stuff from genuinely some of the silent movie stars of the era. And of course, a lot of them did fall into deep depressions after the transition from silent to sound when they couldn't get jobs anymore. So I guess there's quite an element of truth in the story as well.
Something that's not really discussed quite as widely, and probably because Gloria Swanson is Norma Desmond so good. William Holden, I can't remember the name of his character, unfortunately. He's so good.
It's the same name. I think it's the same name as the guy in Chinatown. like Joe Gez.
No, it's
Thank you very
Gillis.
much.
Gillis, isn't it?
Gillis? You sure? I know that there's a guy called Norman Cole in it who's the namesake of. I'll go look this up right now. There's a guy called Gordon Cole who's the namesake of David Lynch's character in Twin Peaks.
Very true. Not relevant to what I'm saying, but true. I was going to say there's a love story. There is a genuine love story at the side of this, and it's not really discussed very often because of how compelling Gloria Swanson's character is. How do we all feel about that?
Can we have our feelings in 1 second after I admit that Joel was right?
Yeah, I knew I was right. I just watched it again. Yeah, I think it's interesting, the love story side of it, isn't it? Because it really does take, when you hear people talk about Sunset Boulevard and things like that, it really does take a back seat, doesn't it? And I think because Gloria Swanson's performance is so all-encompassing and so powerful that it maybe gets forgotten about.
I guess for me, that was maybe one of the bits I didn't really buy into as much, because it was maybe when he did seem a bit more bland, and I couldn't really understand why she would fall in love with him and want to leave her husband for him.
This sounds like a strange comparison, but it does kind of feel like when you watch like a Marx Brothers movie that has like the added love plot, and it feels to me very much like, I understand that it is contrasting the sort of the life of inside the house where everything's very dead and very quiet with like this more exciting life outside where he could actually like continue his life. But I don't know. I just don't think that like it's as engaging, and so it ends up feeling like this sort of extra bit that you're like, oh, can we get back to what's going on that's more interesting?
But then I guess you need it as well to kind of make Norma Desmond's character jealous when she thinks there is someone else.
Yeah,
Other than her.
I'd say, where does it go if you don't have that?
Yeah.
You need it as a counterpoint, but then unfortunately, the other part of the story is far more interesting.
What do you think?
I think it's very sparky, actually, because I pretty much never get bored by this film. I think she is quite an enlightening presence. She's very pleasant, and she shows a potential. If you're looking at it from like a perspective of this is commenting on Hollywood, she's the sort of potential future that's kind of more pleasant and brighter. And Norma Desmond is kind of just trying to claw back on something. So I think she's necessary. I don't think the Marx Brothers comparisons, because I mean, a Marx Brothers film is the love interest has no point ever. It literally is just there just to pad out the film. But I think this serves a very important function.
In reality, there was the whole thing where Gloria Swanson had taken such good care of herself, and Holden had taken terrible care of himself. When they showed, I think when they were originally shooting it, they wanted to put makeup on her to make her look older. But she point blank refused, so they put makeup on Holden to make him look younger instead. Oh, I know. Don, have you got any fun facts about Sunset Boulevard?
Well, that was one of my fun facts.
Oh, sorry.
The boat-shaped bed was also used in the 1925 version of Phantom of the Opera. And other films, yeah.
I like that.
I think it belonged to a French dancer and was sold at auction, and was bought by one of the studios, and then they used it as a prop in many films.
Our second film on the list is Singing in the Rain. Don, do you want to summarize this one?
Yeah, okay. So it's set in the late 20s, and it's the story of a silent movie star played by Gene Kelly, who has humble beginnings in vaudeville and then becomes a stuntman and then a sexy leading man. But with the arrival of the first talking picture, the jazz singer, the silent film he's working on has to transition into becoming a talking picture, and there's lots of obstacles that they have to overcome doing that, and lots of singing and dancing happens as well. And romance and friendship.
Possibly ensue.
Yeah.
So determined to avoid spoilers. So Singing in the Rain was on at least a couple of our lists. I can't remember whose, but it was definitely on mine. Singing in the Rain for me is another one of, for me, it's another one that I watched a lot growing up, and I still return to regularly. Probably watch Singing in the Rain at least once a year. It's makes me happy, basically. I think it's got some really great songs. I could watch pretty much all of them dance all day. It's like, I think it's also really, it's a really interesting take on the move from silent film to talkies, and it does it in a sort of funny, witty way, which I really like. What about Kev or Chris? They're sitting there silently, looking as if they hate Singing in the Rain.
Oh,
I love Singing in the Rain. I thought it was great. I actually hadn't seen it in quite a long time. And so I think I'd forgotten that I loved it. I think maybe when I saw it, the last time I saw it was like maybe sort of 18, 19, probably still in that phase where anything that's any musicals and anything that's too sort of heartwarming and earnest can kind of turn you off a little bit. And so coming back to it with a bit more distance to it this time, I loved it. It was by the end of it, when certain things were happening, that it's just like, oh, you think things are going to go horribly wrong, and then they all turn out to be nice, and everything all like works out really well. It's like, it's lovely. It's very, it brings a tear to the eye.
Well,
Trying to be as spoiler free as possible, but
I would say that was almost too spoiler. What about you, Kev?
it's good. It's good. I mean, I've watched it actually several times this year because I taught it on a classic Hollywood course. Much like Sunset Boulevard, actually, as well. Two sides of the same coin, but very, very different takes on the transition from silent to sound cinema. I think, I mean, because musicals aren't my bag, really. I get a bit irritated by them, but Singing in the Rain, I don't find annoying, usually. There's a song, Noses Supposes.
Moses supposes his
Moses
toes
supposes.
are noses.
That
But
really,
Moses supposes erroneously.
I try not to swear on this podcast, but that fucking winds me right up. I hate it so much. And I hate it because Gene Kelly strikes me, I love Gene Kelly and he's very good. Gene Kelly strikes me as a jock. He's a jock character and he's making fun of this little dweeb. And I don't like it. I think it's mean-spirited. But
The guy's well into it. He's loving it.
no, he's not. He's annoyed. Right, if someone walked in and disrupted my class like that, I'd be furious at them. But anyway, that's the only part of the film I find a bit annoying. And I think
bizarre annoyance. I like it.
I find it very irritating. But I think the songs are generally very fun, loving, and the characters are very likable. Gene Kelly, I can be a bit up and down with him. I find him very likable in this as a rule. And I think he really emphasizes the way that he dances is very distinct to other performers in musicals. He's really muscular.
Yeah.
And he's quite aggressive in the way that he dances. And it's, even if you don't like musicals, you can watch it like a sports film. Because it's just
It's like, oh, I hate him because he's a jock, but I also want to watch it as a sports festival.
I like sport. I just don't like people who are playing it.
And the only person who came out of the film with one of the big two sort of American awards, Golden Globe or an Oscar, was I think Donald O'Connor won a Golden Globe for it. And it's funny because when I was watching it, Don, I was thinking like Donald O'Connor is such a Don character.
I feel like when I very first watched it, I did really like his character, but actually watching it now, I was kind of like, he does tread a very fine line between funny and annoying, and you have to be in the right mood for him, I think.
I think so.
But I do like him, but yeah, sometimes I'm like, is he annoying? I can't tell.
Little bit.
Yeah.
Bit. But most of the songs in Singing in the Rain are recycled from other musicals, aren't they? So I think there's maybe two or three maybe that were new songs from it. But even Singing in the Rain was a song from something in the 20s or the late 20s.
Well, I mean, a lot of the songs, not only were they recycled, they were quite well liked. They were reasonably well known. So, I mean, there's an argument with a lot of these musicals that they're basically jukebox musicals, not dissimilar to something like Mamma Mia, or something, which people look down their nose on, probably correctly. But I mean, this was a very common trend amongst musicals. There was a song that was very well liked and very popular, hung it in a film.
Yeah. No, definitely.
I think what I really like, which kind of connects with that, is just the fact that it is like a lot of films about films end up taking quite a cynical look at Hollywood, which, I mean, to be fair, is probably more realistic than Singing in the Rain's very sort of hopeful view of it. I like how it brings, like, it's almost like you're getting like a wee history lesson in the history of cinema, which I don't know whether in the 50s was quite as, like, I feel like the 50s is when you start getting like big films about films. Like, there's things before then, but I think that this is like a major sort of shift. And then I think it's quite nice to see one where it's just all about the creativity and all about the like enjoyment that people have while making them. And even if that's not entirely accurate to reality, it's what I think we all want to believe about what's going on in Hollywood, even if it's not true. Well, so it's quite an uplifting film that way.
Yeah, it's a film about the love of filmmaking more than, you're right, less than the cynical side of Hollywood, but it's definitely a film about the love of filmmaking. All the characters in it really love making films. They're just struggling with that transition, I suppose. So yeah, I think you're right. I really like that about it. Well, I like that kind of hopeful nature that it has, and I always come out of it smiling.
I think that I mean, well, for one thing, in terms of films about filmmaking, Souls for Sale from 1923, that's a really early example of that, and it's not dissimilar to a sort of Singing in the Rain vibe. But I mean, I'm not sure. I think Singing in the Rain is a bit more cynical than people maybe notice because it's all underlying. And I think for one thing that always bugs me is that it implies that to be famous in Hollywood is a sort of meritocracy, and that what the silent to sound transition did was wipe its hands clean of people who didn't actually have talent. And we all know that's not true about Hollywood. So it's kind of a false lie. But I mean, really, the false lie that it's given you is the same as a gossip column gives you. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it tells you that these stars are very important, very talented people, and they have an art to bring. And that's sometimes the case, but not really always the case. So my love of Singing in the Rain is kind of always tempered by my knowledge of reality.
I do think that, like, to enjoy Singing in the Rain, you need to view it as a fantasy of like how filmmaking is, because in reality, like, Gene Kelly's character would probably be a bit of a prick. And in reality, like, there's no way, like, she's right. The sort of main villain of the film, she would have got someone to dub over her lines because that would have made more money than like having this weird like thing where they get someone new in who's like never been heard of before. Like, that would have sold more tickets, like, to pretend it was this other person, so the studio executive wouldn't be against it. But it's like, I think if you watch it as a film where it's like, this is the ideal version of like what it could have been like, it's a little bit different than like how it actually would be. And it's like this fantasy of everyone who works hard and who's like a good person succeeds, and everyone who's like a bad person fails. And it's almost like a kind of fairy tale in a sense.
I think that's just where, like, my view of this is sort of, somebody called it a history lesson. And it's kind of, I mean, it isn't really. I mean, it basically says when the Jazz Singer came out in 1927, 2 weeks later, everyone was trying to make sound films. And in reality, sound stages couldn't be built that quickly. So there was a good 2 or 3 year gap for most studios. But that's kind of the start of the dismantling of history that it uses. And that's totally fine. It's a musical, it's a fantasy. But this idea that it's an accurate portrayal of the transition from sound to sound isn't really the case.
I don't think anybody necessarily thinks that that's what happened as such, but it's really showing the struggles that people had with the silent to sound era. I don't think it's necessarily saying here's a history lesson, but it's showing the struggles that people had, and that in itself is probably enough for a sort of colourful, quite whimsical musical.
Oh yeah. I sound like I'm taking it very seriously, but it's just someone called it a history lesson. It bothered me.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's a history lesson in terms of the same way that if you had like a film about any sort of period that you might not be aware of, like, you know that it's not all true, but it's like, oh, like, it's interesting to know about these things which you might not have like been thinking about before.
Well, maybe it encourages people who haven't checked out like some of the sort of early talkies or some of the silent cinema to go and check them out.
Far better film at doing that than The Artist. Not a very good film.
True. What do we all think of the sort of Broadway melody sequence in Singing in the Rain?
Yeah, I kind of like how it references things from previously in the film in it, like with the fan and the smoke machine bit, and it makes a really beautiful dance sequence out of it. Yeah, it's really interesting. Even though it's just kind of plonked in there, and he's like, "Hey, what about this bit?" And then it just goes back to normal after that.
I like that. I like that more that it does that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's my favorite bit of the film. The Broadway melody sequence is fantastic. It kind of, I mean, there's a lot of writing about that sequence and how it creates a more cynical undertone to Singing in the Rain, because it's kind of this person who goes out to utilize their talent and is always foiled by a guy with money. It's also implied that the guy with money is a gangster, and obviously there was a lot of gangster connections in Hollywood. So it's actually the most honest sequence of the whole film. But it's got some of the best actual dancing. And they got a dance song. I really enjoy that. I think that's a lot of fun. And the set designs, it's some of the best set design in the film. A lot of Singing in the Rain. This would have been very novel at the time, but now doesn't feel quite so much. A lot of the set design is just big Hollywood sound stages being used. And that's good because it discusses the magic of cinema and, you know, fans going off and all this kind of, this is how films are created. But in terms of actually using this hyper-real musical sensibility, the Broadway melody sequence just slots in there really nicely and just gives you a little compact musical. Love it.
Chris?
I quite liked it. I think there's a sense in which it does feel like, I was thinking about it in terms of, it kind of reminded me, this is a weird comparison, but it kind of reminded me of like the Red Shoes, where there is this sequence where it's like basically telling the overall story in a visual way rather than in through dialogue. And I feel like the Red Shoes does it a lot better. I feel like this scene is very much like, it can be felt, it can be felt as a little bit disposable. I think I sort of turned away for a bit during it, and I was like, all right, okay, like, I don't know. But I do think it's an incredibly creative scene.
I'm appalled that Chris turned away during the Broadway.
I think calling it disposable is so harsh. It's an astonishing piece of making.
I guess it's also interesting that it's kind of like its own little silent film in there, because I mean it does have a few lines in the song, I guess, but most of it is told through the medium of silence.
Don, have you got fun facts about Singing in the Rain?
Apparently Truffaut was a big fan, and he'd seen it so many times that he knew it frame by frame.
I have a fun fact about Singing in the Rain, which is that I went to see a musical version of it at
musical.
No, but I mean like a musical, like a stage musical version of it. And during the intermission, which they had after the Singing in the Rain number, which I feel is a weird place to have an intermission, it's quite late in the film, they got a man out with a hoover to vacuum up all the water on the stage, which is funny.
I would just like to point out the ego of Chris there, that his fact about Singing in the Rain was in fact about him.
I thought I'd seen Singing in the Rain for years, but I realised that I hadn't. I'd only seen the Morecambe and Wise sketch of it.
Bizarre. Chris, you're coming off poorly in this podcast. So the third film we're going to talk about, so we've sort of talked about how Singing in the Rain has quite a lot of sort of hopeful moments in it, and it's like looking to the future and stuff. So the third film we're going to talk about is a film that doesn't really have much hope for anyone, which is Sweet Smell of Success. Chris, I believe this was number 1 on your list, so I think you should describe the plot of it, probably.
So Tony Curtis plays Sidney Falco, who is a press agent. And what he does is he goes around and like he meets people who have acts and tries to get their material into a big newspaper column. And the guy who writes the column is played by Burt Lancaster, and he's called J.J. Hunsaker. And he's this huge man in the city. He's got fingers in every pie. Everyone respects him. But he's got a little bit of a trouble with that his sister is dating a man who he doesn't approve of. And he's going to get her to stop, whether she likes it or not, or whether anyone likes it or not, because he thinks that he's king of the world and he can do anything he likes. And Sidney Falco just has to do what he's told and uses horrible, sleazy ways to get there. I think that was fairly accurate to what happened.
Yeah, I think that's the first time you've got the no spoilers and spoiler. I think, Don, did it also make your top 10?
It did, yes. I kind of watched it quite recently already. I think maybe in the last month or so, because I'd seen it years ago and I'd wanted to rewatch it for a while. So that's probably why I made it, because I really enjoyed it on a rewatch. Got a really, really nice script. It's really, really witty and quite dark, and it's got a really good jazzy score as well, and nice cinematography. And yeah, set in New York as well, like a good New York film. And I think one of the main reasons I really enjoyed it on the rewatch is I think you can kind of feel how much the actors are enjoying themselves. Like they know they've got really great roles and a really great script, and you can almost tell that they're just loving it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Curtis and Lancaster playing against type, and you can see how much they're absolutely relishing that, can't you? Like throughout it, to be honest. And they're both amazing in it. So fair play to them. What about you, Kev?
You know what? I have to admit, I'd sort of forgotten it existed. I watched it maybe a decade ago. Did you think that as well, Joel?
I'd forgotten. I rewatched it this week. I don't think I'd watched it same as you for about a decade.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan. I think it's a very good film. I think it's really interesting. We've gone Singing in the Rain, Sunset Boulevard, and this, because this is obviously, despite being set in New York, it's obviously about Hollywood, and it's obviously about press agents in Hollywood and about the film industry, much more than it's about the entertainment industry in New York. And I really, again, quite enjoyed that it was very secretly cocking a snook at the cynicism of Hollywood in the way that Sunset Boulevard is doing as well. On a rewatch, love Tony Curtis's performance, love Burt Lancaster. We've got a bit of a dearth of European films on this list, and I think this feels very close to being a European film. But I also think Tony Curtis looks like he could be in a Fellini film.
He does, yeah.
Really sharply dressed. He looks like that Guido character, like Marcello. I thought it was deeply cynical, with a few tacked-on elements of hopefulness that maybe feel misplaced in the film. I feel if the censors could have allowed it to be as cynical as it clearly wanted it to be, it would be a fantastic film. But it has to have these few moments of hope. It has to have a happy ending.
Yeah.
As happy as it can be. And
I would say, yeah, the one thing, as much as it was my favourite film, the one thing I don't like, and I kind of try and imagine it's not there, is the last basically 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And if they weren't there, it would be like a perfect film for me. But like at the end, you have like everything seems, all hope and all goodness in the world seems to have been extinguished, and then you get like 30 seconds at the end where they go, well, actually, everything isn't that bad. Like, you know.
That bit kind of jarred me because I'd forgotten that's how it ended, and without spoiling the ending, it did kind of jar me out of it a little bit because it is genuinely about 30 seconds feel tacked on to the end of a really like a film that's it is really cynical in kind of the best possible way for that kind of film, and then you've got a sort of lightly hopeful ending tacked on the end, which doesn't don't get me wrong, it doesn't in any way, shape, or form spoil the film, but it's the one little bit of it that jarred for me.
I think a scene which I really like, which kind of shows how horrible this film is. It's just a horrible, cynical, sleazy film. Is that there's a scene where Tony Curtis has a friend who's a cigarette girl. Her name's Rita. I think she's played by Barbara Nichols. And there's a scene where he essentially tries to pimp her out. And she is really horrible. And he's doing it and he doesn't seem to care. She's like really disgusted by it. But then it turns out that she's done it before, but she's like ashamed to admit it to him. And everyone has their secrets that they're trying to hide from each other. And everyone has like these kind of things that they're willing to do to further their careers, even if they think that they're bad things for them to be doing. And it's just like, I feel like that scene encapsulates the whole movie in just everyone is trying to get ahead and they don't like what they're doing, but they're willing to do it to just try and get their name out there, even if it backfires.
Yeah. And what did we all think about, what do we all think about both Curtis and Lancaster generally? And what do you think about them playing what is definitely against their usual roles at the time in this? Do you have a preference for one or the other?
Oh, I think maybe before I watched it, I would have said Lancaster, but I think maybe Tony Curtis is so enjoyable to watch, and it maybe slightly better. I don't know. They're both great though.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to choose. That really, I mean, both the performances are fantastic, and it feels like the script has been written to support these two, like Goliaths, battling it off against each other. I think that Tony Curtis, arguably his character, because he's the protagonist, he gets a lot more to do. So Burt Lancaster, you slowly realise the depths of his sociopathy. And Tony Curtis, because he's actually the underdog in all this, there's this, even though he's a horrible venal character, there's a sliver of sympathy that means you kind of want to see him get through.
Yeah.
Because he is ultimately, there's a horrible pyramid of exploitation, and Burt Lancaster, his character, he's at the top of it. And Tony Curtis is really quite at the bottom of it, and the cigarette girl that Chris mentioned is way, way, way at the bottom of it. So you kind of basically realise that no matter what happens, Burt Lancaster will always come through in the end. And it means that you, just enough for the film to work, you kind of want Tony Curtis to best him somehow.
Yeah.
Even though he's a horrible man.
Yeah.
So it's he has a few more elements to him necessarily.
I think I was always like, remember the first time I watched it, was terrified of Burt Lancaster's dead-eyed stare. And like, again, this time, still he stares deep into my soul with those eyes. And then, like, I hope I'm not feeling a fun fact here, but I found out today that they put Vaseline all over his glasses so he couldn't see. So the dead-eyed stare, he genuinely couldn't see what he was looking. Like, oh, that's great. I'm stealing it.
I really like, what do people think about, like, I think a lot of films, especially, it's kind of almost like a film noir in a sense, and a lot of films like that have like this kind of cynicism and this kind of like sliminess to them. But I feel like this almost like balances that out a little bit, or maybe even makes it worse, like in a kind of decadent way. That it's almost quite cool. Like the lives that they live, like they have like there's an amazing soundtrack to the whole movie that is like really like cool and jazzy, and like the lives that they lead are like horrible, but you can see why they would want to lead them in a sense, because they are like wearing the best clothes, and they are like, and it's this horribly decadent world where everyone is just like really, it's different from some film noirs where just everything's horrible. Whereas like here it's like, oh, everyone's trying to get ahead, and where they're trying to get has this sheen of cool over it. I don't know what people think about that.
I would agree. I think that I didn't bring up Fellini accidentally there. I think there's a lot of comparisons to be made about how seductive the environment that they're in is. And Don mentioned New York and the landscape of New York and how magical and romantic it looks. And even though this isn't like some Broadway musical, this is a guy who gets beaten up at the end by the police because he's tried to plant some weed on someone. You know, this is the Wire. You know, and it still looks amazing at the end. It still has this romanticism behind it, and it does feel like the lie that Burt Lancaster's character is selling is maintained at the end. You're not put off show business at the end. You're put off him and you're put off the industry, but show business still seems amazing.
Have you got any fun facts that I didn't accidentally steal?
Orson Welles was originally considered for the role of J.J. Hunsucker. Well, I don't know if that would have worked.
I can see why someone would pick him for that, because it does feel like a role we would fit, but I think Lancaster's probably better.
I can't anyone except Lancaster really now, but
I feel like Orson Welles would have really, no offense to Orson Welles, he's every now and again been a bit of a ham, and I think he might have. There's every danger of that happening with that.
yeah, with something like that type of role, you could see how he'd play it, couldn't you? It would probably be not quite the same.
Grander.
Because there's such a quiet intensity to Lancaster, the way he plays it is kind of scarier than if he was really, really big about it.
I don't know if anyone's ever accused Orson Welles of being quietly intense. So moving on from Sweet Smell of Success, the fourth film that we've chosen is Ikiru. Kev, do you want to describe the plot?
So Ikiru really translates to living. And the film is ultimately about living. And it is also about this character called Watanabe, who's this bureaucrat who's fairly effectless. He has done nothing for 30 years since his wife dies. And then he finds out right at the start of the film that he has stomach cancer. And this leads him on this, effectively a mental breakdown, where he goes to try and find out how he should live out the rest of his life now that he knows when it's going to end. So he tries to live through booze and through women. That doesn't quite work. He tries to live via youth. He meets this young woman and he tries to sort of enjoy what she enjoys. And he basically finds out that charity is how you should live. The film then splits off halfway through. He's died. He's decided to build this play park and he's pushed through all of the bureaucracy in order to do that. We're at his funeral and no one really appreciates what he's done. So it's very humanistic and it's also very pessimistic. To me, it's like if Frank Capra was a manic depressant. That's basically what it is.
Yeah. I think we talked about earlier how, if Capra had made Ikiru, it would be a much more hopeful, corny kind of film. Because, see, if you describe plot as, if you just describe the plot as a man who finds out he's dying tries to work out the best way of living, right? It's like that can be taken in so many directions, and I would say this is the most interesting direction it can be taken in, probably. But it can also be taken in that sort of Hollywood style direction where his life sort of affects all these people, and they choose to start living their life in a better way, quote unquote better way, and it doesn't do that. And I've always liked that at the end of the film, for these sort of bureaucrats, life just goes on, and it's like they're a bit too apathetic and scared to challenge the machine in any way, shape, or form. But sort of his last gesture, whilst it made him happy in his sort of dying days to grant the building of this play park, it didn't actually have any lasting effect on his work colleagues. And I always thought that was a really, really interesting way of going about it. And it's kind of what really struck me about it every time I've watched it, is that's a very different approach to that story.
Well, I think I'd agree entirely. And I think comparing it to Hollywood might seem a bit unfair on basically what is a Hollywood list apart from this film. But when you think about it, Kurosawa had Rashomon the year before, which is his first time on the international stage. And his reply when he won at Cannes was, "What a shame a historical Japanese film has won an award when a present-day Japanese film could win this award." So this is Kurosawa responding very consciously to being on an international stage. So I don't think it's unfair to think that probably he was looking to Hollywood, and he probably was looking to how they would tackle a certain genre, and then taking his slant on that. Because there's a lot of Frank Capra about it.
Yeah.
A lot of hopefulness about it. And I think as an evocation of present day Japan, it's very interesting because it's very individualist at a time when Japan wasn't very individualist, and very almost American in its values. So there's a lot of comparisons with American cinema, but it's very definitely a Japanese film.
Yeah. What about you, Don?
Yeah, I think I'd mostly seen Kurosawa's samurai films up till that point, and I'd always meant to watch this one because I'd never really been into any of the samurai ones that much. Like, I liked them, but I didn't love any of them. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Well, not enjoy is maybe not the right word, but yeah, I didn't move for like 2 hours and 20 minutes. I just sat there taking it in. Because yeah, it flies by. Like, it's so well paced and unfolds slowly, but there's not a dull moment in it. I really like the idea that the second half unfolds through other people's eyes and it doesn't go the way that you think it would in the build in the park bit. I think there's maybe a bit of optimism at the end, like, because I think he changes one person's mind.
So maybe one's enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think there's a kind of hint of optimism in it. So maybe the guy doesn't do anything about it right there and then, but he'll always remember that experience, I think, and he might be the next person to leave and do something different with his life.
What about you, Chris?
See, I viewed it as a lot more optimistic than any of you did, which is, I feel like the kind of anger of the film and the cynicism that the film might have is directed at the bureaucracy and at the sort of government agencies. But actually what he ends up doing is he ends up doing something which, like, the very first scene of the film, if I remember rightly, is the sort of local residents come into the government offices asking for this thing to be done. And then at the end, it's done and they are happy. And so it's like, even in a world where like I think rather than like pessimistic or like sort of cynical, I think it's more realist, where it's like the people who are running the government and the people who are running these offices might be very petty and very self-involved. But like, if you actually viewed if you had this sort of near death or sort of close to death experience, you would be able to see outside of that and just do something for other people without any reward. Like, because he's happy. Like, they say, like, the mayor's taken all the credit before he even dies. They say that the mayor already did a speech where he took all the credit, and then he's still happy because the thing was done, and he didn't do it for any kind of credit. He did it because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I find that very, like, I suppose you could say it's like individualistic in a sense because it's about individual action, but in a sense it's also like it's about being selfless and about like not doing stuff for your own benefit. Like, and the thing that brings you joy and the thing that gives your life meaning is like giving away your life to others,
And isn't that the sign
which I find very hopeful.
like the sign of a great film is that we've all taken something very slightly different out of it, right? And that it's got so many layers. You can like I could agree with every single thing that each of you has said because none of them are wrong. They're all actually correct in their own individual way because it's such a multi-layered film that you probably take a different opinion every time you watch it.
Yeah, I don't remember having this. I think I was closer to like viewing it as quite a pessimistic film the first time I saw it. But I think it was just this time I was paying my focus was on a different set of characters almost.
I think that I don't view it as a pessimistic film by any means. I think when I said it was Frank Capra by a manic depressant, I was purely hyperbole. But I do think that it's an optimism which is tempered by realism, which is effectively what you're saying, Chris. And I think that there's a character at the end who is possibly changed by Watanabe's actions. He goes and he views the play park that Watanabe's built at the end, and he sees the sort of real life effects of Watanabe's charitable actions. And he maybe is changed by it. But I think that there's another possibility, which is that Watanabe is really changed by knowing when his time's up. And until any of these characters know when their time is up, they won't really change because you can't really do that in your job. Because if you lose your job, then you lose your entire livelihood and you become poorer than those women who needed the play part. So I'm in the realist kind of tone that Kurosawa was taking is that these people are survivalists. And they're as realist and as pragmatic as Kurosawa himself is. So I think you're right. I think it's a judgment of bureaucracy, and I don't think it's a judgment of the people. But I think that he is saying these people can't really change. Systems have to change.
Yeah. And I think that picking up on that last point, I think what's really interesting about it is there is very little judgment of the people in it. There's certainly a strong judgment systems, but actually the people are I don't want to say indoctrinated, but they are part of a system that doesn't allow them to make the changes that they possibly want to make, and they feel almost like crushed by the system. And what do we all think of? Are we all quite big Kurosawa fans in general, or no? Like I know Don, you said like you weren't as big fans of samurai films. Have you seen other ones now? And like after watching Akira?
I just watched High and Low, and I really enjoyed that one as well. So I think maybe you gotta go for the crime ones and instead of the samurai ones for me.
High and Low is a cracker.
Yeah, really good. Yeah.
High and Low's the one with the little. It's a black and white film. But it's just got a bit of red smoke.
Yeah.
Fucking amazing. Oh.
What about Kevin, Chris? Are you big Kurosawa fans in general? Is this one that particularly stands out?
It's very mood dependent for me because I think a lot of the films that I like by Kurosawa are quite long and quite slow. And so I think if you're in the mood to sit down and kind of soak into them, then I can be really behind them. And so I think it depends. Like I've seen some which I didn't like at all, and I've seen some that I loved, and I think it's less to do with some being better than others and more the mood I was in at the time. I think that you need to. They're not like I think a lot of them. Even this one, I think the first time I saw it, I didn't like it as much. I think you need to like be willing to kind of slow down your mind and kind of soak into it more. Which sometimes I'm not able to do. And then I've seen, like, I wasn't a huge fan of Throne of Blood, even though I've heard that that's a really good film. And maybe it was just I wasn't in the right mood for it when I watched it. So maybe I'll go back and watch that as well.
Kev?
Huge. Huge. I think that from Stray Dog, which is the year before Rashomon, until Redbeard, I don't think he really puts the foot wrong, to be honest.
So to summarize then, for me, any film that can make you feel a breadth of emotions that are like complex emotions and sometimes contrasting emotions is a really, really strong film. Like you'll be kind of hopeful then downtrodden, or like there's elements of optimism and pessimism. And I think you want that from any film that's of this genre.
I really like it because it's one of those films where I'm a big fan of films where people go through like a hardship, but then they're still trying to be like they're still trying to be the best kind of person they can be, like where being through hardship doesn't show up people as horrible animalistic monsters. Like being through hardship shows you at the best you can be. Especially I think what makes this so good is the fact that it's quite realistic, so that doesn't feel unearned, it doesn't feel sentimental, it feels real. And also something which I mean we've kind of hinted at, but we've not really spoken about. I think it's a really beautiful film. I think it's incredibly well shot, especially the sort of final sequence is just sort of hauntingly beautiful. So yeah, great film.
John, I forgot to ask you if you've got any fun facts about it. Or
Yeah, oh, I do. I've got a great fun fact. In 2003, DreamWorks attempted to remake the film in the US, which would star Tom Hanks,
oh no!
which which was going to be directed by Jim Sheridan. But this did not happen.
Wow.
Probably for the best.
Yes, I'm glad that didn't happen.
Would have
I
been
don't know. I mean, if
more
you
sense.
look at Hollywood generally, like the bucket list is Ikiru. It's a very, very bad version of Ikiru, but it's a very well-worn generic idea that Kurosawa originates. It's, you know.
And what
I
about
want to see Tom Hanks sitting on a swing now, like in the snow. Be nice.
I don't. I really don't.
Was he
Don,
going to wear his makeup from Cloud Atlas?
so Don, why do you love Ikiru?
Yeah, I guess it was something I thought about quite a lot after watching it. I think it does kind of stay with you. And it doesn't feel sentimental, even though it does kind of make you care about what's going on and you can feel emotional, but it doesn't feel too much ever. And it's kind of simple and complex at the same time.
And Kev?
Simplex and Simplex? Jesus. I'll stop drinking the wine in a minute. Simple and complex at the same time is probably the best way to describe it. Is that it's a really beautiful idea. It's this grand theme of what is living when I know I'm going to die, and it's executed perfectly, and it's sentimental in exactly the right way, I would say, in that it understands that family is very important, but it also understands that family won't always be there for you, and it understands that the work that you do is very important, but it also understands that the work that you do won't always be fulfilling. So every optimistic thing is tempered by a very realistic concept, and yeah, that always sits really well with me. Is this idea that you can try, and trying is enough. Ultimately, trying to do the right thing is enough. It won't always work out. It won't always be the best thing in the world that you do, but trying is enough, and that I love it. I think it's a great theme that we should all work towards. I think a lot of American films that we have watched have been sentimental in the sense that they've said, you try and everything will work out fantastically. And this says, try and not everything will work out fantastically, but that's still good enough.
Yeah.
And that's why I love it.
I think that's good. A good summary. Yeah. So the final film, the fifth film, 1950s that we chose was 12 Angry Men. 12 Angry Men is 12 jurors trying to decide on the innocence or guilt of someone who is on trial. It's pretty much all set in one room, and it is the story of one man trying to convince the rest of the jurors that there is reasonable doubt. Chris, you rewatched it, and I don't know if you liked it more than you thought you did this time round.
I think that I watched it quite a long time ago, maybe like over 10 years ago, and I think that I thought that it was a lot more theatrical than I think it is. I think it's like, obviously, like in some of the dialogue, I think it still comes across a little bit like a play because it's based off of one and it's all set in one room. But I feel like the performances are a lot more realistic and a lot more believable than I remembered them. I think that I thought when I watched it, it was almost as though they'd plonked the camera down and everyone was just sitting at the table speaking in big over-the-top voices at each other, which is definitely not what it is at all. I think it's actually a very thoughtful film and a very well-acted film. And actually, considering that it's one of those films where like I feel like the director is trying to like hide the fact that they're there, and they're trying to make you like focus on what's occurring rather than doing anything like any kind of flourishes. But I do think that the way that it's directed, is also very effective.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't watched it in a long time, and I so long, I don't even remember whether I thought it was theatrical or not. I think I was maybe 14, 15. The last time I saw it, I watched it last week. I really enjoyed it. I probably wouldn't have put it on this list if I was totally honest. Ed Begley's character, who is an unapologetic racist throughout the film, who is almost sort of becomes an apologetic racist by the end, which is the best that they can hope for. He is maybe a little caricatured and maybe a little bit of a grotesque rather than a real life figure. And there's also, we were talking about the dweeb character in the film, and I believe you were comparing me to him, Joe. So thank you for that. But I felt like he was a little one note. But I thought that the central premise, which is that we have this melting pot in America and we all have to respect it. I mean, it's a very respectable theme. Brilliant. I'm not going to jeer at the film. It was good.
I would like to pick something up that Kev just said there, which is I do find that I did have one kind of mild issue with it, which I do think maybe it would even have been on my list if I'd rewatched it before I came out with it. I really loved it. But I do think the one thing I have a sort of mild issue with is that the film is very good at sort of taking apart the prejudices that everyone has, but it almost seems as though Henry Fonda doesn't have any. And he's the one very neutral, very logical person who's like, he's the one sort of man of truth. And it's like, it kind of makes it seem like, as much as we probably all agree with his perspective, it makes it seem as though like he is objective and truthful rather than also being shaped by his circumstances. And there's like a tiny bit where they kind of question that, where they go, oh, what if you let off a man who actually did murder his dad? Like, where they kind of like vaguely question that, but I don't think they go into it enough. And in this film, it doesn't really bother me, but it does remind me of, there's like a film called Inherit the Wind, which I watched last year, which is about sort of fundamentalist Christians. And it is incredibly preachy in terms of, oh, well, if you're a fundamentalist creationist, then you're essentially an idiot. And we are the logical people who know the truth. And I found it kind of obnoxious. And I don't think that 12 Angry Men is nearly as bad as that. But I do think there is a slight hint of, well, Henry Fonda is just the great liberal man who knows the truth about everything.
Well, there's more than a slight hint because he wears a bright white suit and he's called an architect.
Yeah.
So he's God. Henry Fonda is God, and God has come down to tell 11 more men what they should be thinking, which is that there's always reasonable doubt for a murder.
I guess in reference to the Henry Fonda thing, it kind of felt quite appropriate that he was in Hitchcock's The Wrong Man the year before, and he was the person that was made guilty when he wasn't. So maybe it's actually a spiritual sequel with the same character, and he's like, made guilty because this happened to me and it ruined my life. The end. But yeah, no, I find it really interesting and gripping all the way through, and it was very entertaining. There's quite a bit of humour in it as well, which I kind of forgot about. And the sweatier and more claustrophobic it gets, the more tense it becomes. So the focal length was gradually increased over the course of the filmmaking. The shots near the end more close up and claustrophobic with a shorter depth of field.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it's actually quite an interestingly shot film for one room, like, because obviously in one room you've got to make, you can't just, like what you were saying, that you remembered it basically being plonk a camera down. You've got to, for it to be an interesting film, for it to be considered as highly as it is, I think he would have had to have done something reasonably interesting with the camera. So starting off on those like high above people's head, like almost wide angle shots was really interesting, and then sort of going into mids, and then by the end it's pretty much all in close up. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Sidney Lumet's the director. I know we've not mentioned him by name yet. And I think he's a little underrated, arguably.
I think so as well, yeah.
He's seen as quite a functional director, I think, who has a great eye for scripts. And I think 12 Angry Men shows the versatility that he can find in one room. Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, other films that reminded me of was like Tape by Linklater.
Yeah.
Or Wittgenstein by Derek Jarman as well. It's all just this one black screen, and just shows what Derek Jarman can do with the camera. There's Sidney Lumet does a fantastic job in making this feel like much more than the sum of its parts, which is a play from a very limited perspective.
I could be wrong, but I think it was the first feature film he directed.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah.
He worked in TV a lot before then, but that was his first feature film.
There's quite a few later ones which I've not seen the majority of his work, but there's quite a few that I've seen. There's one called The Pawnbroker, which I haven't seen in quite a while, but I remember being very good. And there's one with Sean Connery that I really enjoyed. I can't quite remember what it's called. Maybe it's called something like, is it called like A Fence or something? Yeah, which I'm a big fan of as well. I think that, he is someone who I think is very good at capturing intense, claustrophobic emotion.
Well, me and Kev are both big fans of Before the Devil Knows You're Dead.
And Dog Day Afternoon is also very sweaty film. A lot of that's kind of set in the bank.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's a really good director at capturing that claustrophobia, isn't he? That kind of, it's like almost you're just sitting on the edge of your seat the entire time, and he's very, very good at that.
I think a lot of the films that we've discussed this week have been quite, they're very dramatic films, and Sidney Lumet was always more of a realist. And 12 Angry Men is clearly the start of that kind of realist acting, like, because as someone said, it could have been a very theatrical piece in terms of the acting. I would argue Ed Begley is quite theatrical. He's quite a big character. But everyone else, it's quite a measured performance.
Yeah. See, I really, for example, like the guy we call the dweebish one, because none of us can actually remember what. Love his character. I think he's
Yeah.
really my favorite characters in it because he actually has a little arc himself.
Hmm.
No bravery at the start, and he sort of finds his voice a little bit and kind of starts to stick up for himself a wee bit. And I like that. I kind of like that. A lot of them have their own little arc in there. You could argue that there's a couple. I would probably agree with you that he's certainly the most theatrical in the whole thing.
He's the character that is there to make a point so clearly.
And what do we all think? Was the boy innocent or guilty? Because I guess the point that's not really the point. Because the point with the jury is you have to find reasonable doubt. It's not.
Hmm.
What do we think? Here's a question for you. Does anyone have an opinion? Having watched the film, were you convinced by Henry Fonda's reasonable doubt, or did you completely? I'm guessing Kev a bit completely unconvinced.
No, I wasn't unconvinced. No, I thought there was definitely reasonable doubt. My problem with the film wasn't whether or not there was reasonable doubt, but it was kind of the same problem that Chris had, was that the arguments on the other side seemed almost like straw men to me. And so that meant that the strength of the reasonable doubt argument and the prejudices of the other characters was somewhat weakened by the fact they were a little caricaturish at times.
What about you two? What did you come out of it thinking? He's innocent, guilty. There's reasonable doubt.
I guess it's kind of hard because the film kind of makes you see reasonable doubt by the end, because at the start you think he's guilty because everyone else is saying he's guilty and you only hear their perspective of it. You don't have any other kind of contrasting evidence to kind of say why they're not, because you weren't there. So you kind of just follow the same path as the characters in a way.
Yeah.
I think my issue is that it's almost, as Dawn said, it's almost like it doesn't matter because they do kind of tell you what to do. And my main issue with it is that I feel, and this might be unfair, but I feel like it's almost asking the wrong questions, where it seems to kind of imply that if there had been enough evidence, then it would have been fine to go and put him in the electric chair as long as you didn't enjoy it. Which I think that my issue is more that Henry Fonda, his argument is very rules based, and it's very like, well, actually, you're all wrong because you didn't follow the rules as well as I did, rather than like appealing to, because you didn't notice this thing and you didn't notice this thing, and rather than being like, oh, well, maybe just capital punishment generally is bad, and maybe that's just coming from me, but I feel like his worldview remains unquestioned throughout the film.
I see it as a very anti-capital punishment film. Like I see it almost entirely as a film that's quite strongly against the death penalty. Actually.
Yeah, I think that if Henry Fonda's character had started meditating on the idea of capital punishment, then I don't think there would be much of a film, to be honest. It's already verging on preachy. It doesn't really need that added. And I think that what you have when he's talking about a rules-based evidence is quite interesting, because that's what evidence is. But also you have this very pragmatic character at the end who is the sort of well, he's not quite the standalone, but he's the one character with no prejudices.
Yeah.
And he doesn't quite see the evidence as mounting up in favour of reasonable doubt. And so you would need the rules-based kind of evidence to convince him. He's actually, ultimately, he would be the perfect juror.
Yeah, that's true. What do you all feel about in general then about films that are like that kind of one man or one woman against the system sort of films? Because I tend to have a little bit of a soft spot for them, or those type of characters. Like I'm thinking like in the Alan Clark film Scum, like Archer, and like Henry Fonda's character in 12 Angry Men. I'm thinking characters like that. What do any of you have sort of strong thoughts either way on that, or does it entirely depend on the film? Because I know that for some people that's a bit of an off-putting sort of character trope.
No, I'm a big fan of that. I think it's more just I like it when it's people who there's a bit more questioning of them themselves as well. just I think sometimes it can end up being like, well, the world is stupid and there's this one smart man or one smart, I was going to say or one smart woman, but it is nearly always a one smart man who goes, I know the truth. And I think that can be a bit problematic sometimes. Not in 12 Angry Men, I don't think that's a huge problem, but like I think if you challenge them as well and then you sort of work through it, I think it can be really, really interesting.
And what about you, Don?
I guess it's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I guess I watched that probably most recently. That's the one I can think of. And yeah, I feel like I did have a problem with that, and now I can't think where it was. Maybe it'll come back to me.
Yeah. Well, having said that, when I was trying to describe that Archer from Scum, okay. What about you, Kev?
Yeah, I mean, it does depend on the film. The Trial by Orson Welles, brilliant version of that, and the ridiculousness of bureaucracy. Erin Brockovich, I think, is a really good version. A lot of people don't like that film. I think that's a really good version, and one of the few times I like Julia Roberts.
So yeah, so let's summarize then why we love 12 Angry Men, because I feel like kind of all of us seem like we don't really like it that much from the. But
I really like it.
Hmm?
I really like it.
So I love it as well. But why, so Dawn, let's go with you first then. Why do you love 12 Angry Men?
It's just so compact and entertaining. Like it's only 90 minutes and it packs in so much interesting viewpoints and ideas, and everyone will take something slightly different away from it, like we have just discovered.
Kev?
No, I did really like it. I wouldn't say love, but I like it a lot. And I think that what we've proven with this little discussion is that it's a film that's ripe for debate. And it is intended as a film that's ripe for debate. It's intended clearly as you leave the cinema with whoever you're with and you say, well, I actually agreed with them. And I thought that didn't really work. And that's obviously why it existed and still exists. It's not dead.
Yeah.
Well, it is a didactic film. It's a message film to an extent as well, which isn't an issue. But I think it's very good for what it is. I think it's discussing the idea of reasonable doubt. It's discussing the sanctity of life, and it's also the script is very sharp and is regularly funny. Most of the characters are actually very warm. And what I really like about it is that there are some characters at the start that you think are going to be very cold and very unappealing, and by the end you quite like them.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible script to do that.
And what about you, Chris?
I think when Dawn said the word compact, that was very I think that's really important because it is like what they're trying to do is show so many sides. Like there's 12 different sides to society being shown in 90 minutes. And sometimes, as we've said, that can end up in caricature, but it's mainly because they're trying to fit so many different ideas into such a small space and have them all bounce off each other while still having like quite an interesting plot. Like you could watch this without watching any of the kind of metaphorical elements and literally just watch it as some men in a room having an argument, like on a very sort of basic like narrative level, and I think it would still be very gripping.
Yeah.
And so there's so much going on, and all the acting is incredibly sort of
Good.
gritty and well done. That yeah, I don't really like. I may have my issues with what it's trying to do, but I can't have any problem with how it does it, I think.
Yeah. Well, so for me, it's really tense the entire way through. There's a hell of a lot of tension. There's a hell of a lot of drama for a one-room thing. And actually, it was remade in possibly the 90s with Jack Lemmon playing Henry Fonda's character, and that's also good. So I think the idea behind it and the story behind it is really good and holds up really well. And they made very small changes for that version. One of the very few remakes of a classic film that I actually think is decent. And And yeah, I think Henry Fonda's really great in it. The supporting cast is great, and it really holds your attention when quite often these sort of wondering things maybe won't. So yeah, that's the 5 we chose for the 50s. So now it's that time that we all love or dread, where we go around and give our vote. I will go with. See, I wouldn't have said this, but on rewatch, I'll go with Ikiru. I thought that it's interesting, this whole thing, rewatching films that you saw 10 years ago and taking something completely different out of them. And what you think are your favorites kind of shifts and changes over time. And that's why this whole thing's been really beneficial and interesting, is that you go back into a film and you take something new out of it. And I think with Akira that, so here's my thinking, is that Singing in the Rain makes me feel happiness by the end. Sweet Smell of Success makes me feel quite depressed by the end. Whereas Akira probably makes me feel a complex range of emotions that I don't. It's very rare to come out of a film feeling happy and sad, and like optimistic and pessimistic, and because that's all at the same time, I think that for me kind of brings it to the forefront of my mind. So at this moment in time, I would say Akira. What about Kev?
I would agree. Akira was the top of my list. It was that and Wild Strawberries, the Ingmar Bergman film, which is two sort of miserable old men coming to terms with their life. And I think Akira has a complexity to it. It manages to engage with the personal and the political seamlessly. And it also manages to engage with the creative and with youth and with age and with death and with life, all sort of in a really fluid, unpacked way. And its structure is also something really fascinating. The fact that it splits itself in half. So there's quite a long film, but you feel like you've just watched two films that are about the same subject. So it gives you this broad range of emotions. And I love it so much, and do take something new from it every time I see it. And I also would like to say this is a vote for every Kurosawa film from the 50s. That's my opinion on it. Because I don't.
It isn't. But Kev managed to sneak Wild Strawberries in there as well. By the way, my number one was 400 Blows, and that didn't make it on. So, what about you, Don?
I think I'm also going to agree. Which, I think I didn't want to be too hasty at putting it number one, since I'd only just watched it for the first time. But I think having thought about it, I think it's probably the one that's closest to being the perfect film out of the list, and for a lot of the reasons that you've already mentioned, so I won't repeat them again. It's just lovely. It's got a really cute old man as well. It's like Umberto D, but not as sentimental.
I like that we're all sneaking a film in that didn't make it.
Well, there was a lot of good sad old man films in the 50s, wasn't there?
Yeah,
Not to mention all of them.
that's true. And what about you, Chris?
I think that this decade, all the films which we watched have brought something new to me, because I think I haven't watched a lot of them in a long time. So I think all of them I really enjoyed.
Is that your vote?
No, but so I do have a favourite, which I'm going to say is The Sweet Smell of Success, because it was number one on my list before we started this, and it's still there.
Yeah.
I feel a bit like Henry Fonda right now. One man with the correct opinion when everyone else is prejudiced against me.